You know what's worse than breaking a promise? Breaking a promise about saving people money while they're literally watching their bills go up. It's like promising to help someone lose weight and then handing them a family-sized pizza. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where today we're talking about Ed Miliband, energy bills, and the fascinating political art of promising 300 quid in savings while prices climb in completely the opposite direction. Before you continue, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on this channel. Thank you. So who's the situation? And trust me, it's a proper mess. Energy bills are rising again. Ofgem, the energy regulator, who somehow always seems to be the bearer of bad news, has announced that the energy price cap is going up by 0.2% for January to March 2026. Now, 0.2% doesn't sound like much, does it? It's basically a rounding error, a sneeze in numerical form. But here's the thing, when you're already paying through the nose for energy, even a tiny percentage increase stings. And the optics? Absolutely dreadful. For an average household paying by direct debit for gas and electricity, the annual bill is now £1,758. Let that sink in for a second. £1,758 just to keep the lights on and the heating running. That's not a bill, that's a small holiday. That's a decent used car. That's approximately 900 cups of overpriced coffee, not that anyone's counting. And here's where it gets properly awkward for the government. Back when Labour took power in June 2024, that same average bill was £1,690. So in the space of Labour's time in office, bills have gone up by 68 quid. Not down, up. Which is unfortunate when your energy secretary has spent months promising to cut bills by £300 by 2030. Ed Miliband, bless him, has been banging on about this £300 reduction like it's written in stone, delivered from on high, an absolute certainty. Except there's one tiny problem. The bills are currently doing the exact opposite of going down. They're going up. It's like promising to take someone to the beach and then driving them to the mountains. Sure, both are scenic, but one is distinctly not what was advertised. Now, Claire Coutinho, the Shadow Energy Secretary, has absolutely pounced on this like a cat on a particularly slow mouse. She's out here saying that Miliband promised to cut everyone's energy bills by 300 quid, but experts are now warning that his plans will actually lock us into paying higher bills for decades. That's not just missing the target, that's shooting in completely the wrong direction and somehow hitting yourself in the foot. Coutinho's argument, and it's worth paying attention to this because it's actually quite clever politically, is that despite gas prices falling globally, it's the extra costs of net zero targets that are putting upward pressure on bills. So basically, the raw ingredients are getting cheaper, but the recipe we're using is so expensive that the final product costs more anyway. It's like buying budget pasta, but then covering it in truffle oil and gold leaf and wondering why your dinner cost a fortune. And here's where the politics gets really spicy. Coutinho dropped a little bombshell this week, citing her report that claims green levies on bills will soar by another £260 by 2030. Now, if that's accurate, and we can debate the methodology all day, but if it's even remotely close to accurate, then Miliband's promise of £300 savings suddenly looks less ambitious policy and more like fantasy fiction. Because if green levies add 260 and he's promising to save 300, that means he needs to find £560 of savings elsewhere just to break even. Good luck with that. The Conservatives are pushing their cheap power plan, which they claim would cut everyone's electricity bills by 20% in time for winter. Coutinho even threw down the gauntlet, saying Miliband could adopt it tomorrow if he really cared about cutting bills. That's a proper political challenge right there. It's basically saying, we've got the answers, you're just too stubborn to use them. Whether their plan would actually work is another question entirely, but as opposition messaging goes, it's pretty effective. So what's Labour's response to all this? Well, Martin McCluskey, the Minister for Energy Consumers, which sounds like a job title someone made up on the spot, but apparently is real, has acknowledged that energy bills remain too high. Congratulations on that stunning observation, Martin. Really going out on a limb there. But he's also pointing to the expanded warm home discount scheme, which gives millions more families 150 quid off their bills this winter. Now, that's not nothing. £150 is decent money for families struggling with energy costs. But here's the problem. It's a sticking plaster on a wound that needs stitches. It's reactive rather than proactive. It's the government saying, we know bills are too high, so here's some money to help you pay them, rather than actually making the bills lower in the first place. It's the difference between giving someone an umbrella and stopping the rain. McCluskey also talked about the government's clean power mission and a new golden age of nuclear. Now, nuclear power is genuinely quite exciting if you're into that sort of thing, which admittedly most people aren't until their energy bill arrives. Nuclear power can provide cheap, clean electricity to power millions of homes, kickstart economic growth, and create thousands of jobs. That all sounds brilliant, genuinely brilliant. But here's the catch. Nuclear power stations take years, sometimes decades to build. So promising cheaper energy through nuclear is a bit like promising someone a sandwich and then handing them some seeds and saying, just wait for the wheat to grow. Technically accurate, but not immediately helpful. And this is where we hit the fundamental tension in energy policy that nobody really wants to talk about honestly. The transition to net zero is expensive upfront. Building wind farms cost money. Building solar farms cost money. Building nuclear power stations costs a lot of money. Upgrading the grid costs money. All of this investment eventually leads to cheaper, cleaner energy in the long term, but in the short term, someone's got to pay for it. And that someone, inevitably, is you and me through our energy bills. The government's argument is essentially, yes, bills might be higher now, but in 2030 or 2035 or whenever, they'll be much lower because we'll have all this cheap renewable energy. That's a fair argument in principle. It's investing now for future gains, but it's a really tough sell to families who are struggling to pay this month's bill and couldn't care less about theoretical savings in 2030 when they need to heat their home in 2025. Gareth Clote from Go.Compare Energy pointed out that we typically see the energy price cap rise in winter months, so this increase isn't shocking. Fair point. Winter energy usage goes up because, shockingly, it's cold and dark and people need heating and lights. But just because something is expected doesn't make it any less painful. It's like expecting rain in Britain. Yes, it happens all the time, but that doesn't mean anyone's happy about getting drenched. Clote said this rise will bring worry to bill payers as we head into colder and darker months. That's putting it mildly. For millions of households, winter isn't just inconvenient, it's genuinely frightening. There are people making impossible choices between heating and eating, which in 2025 in one of the world's wealthiest countries is absolutely obscene. Sam Richards, the CEO of Britain Remade, made some genuinely interesting points that are worth unpacking. He said while £3 increase might not sound like much, the cost of living remains a major concern for millions who've endured eye-watering energy bills for too long. He's right. That £3 increase isn't the problem. It's the £1,758 base that's the problem. That £3 is just insult added to financial injury. But Richards also touched on something crucial. He said reforming Britain's outdated planning system is key to speeding up the time it takes to build wind farms, solar installations, and nuclear plants. This is actually where the real action is. Britain's planning system is legendarily slow. It can take years just to get approval to build renewable energy projects. By the time you've navigated all the consultations, appeals, and reviews, technology has moved on and costs have changed. It's bureaucratic quicksand. Richards warned that cutting red tape will get spades in the ground faster and make clean energy cheaper. But, and this is important, he also said the government risks making renewables more expensive by cramming as many projects as possible into the next renewable energy auction to hit the clean grid pledge by 2030. That's a fascinating tension. The government wants to hit ambitious targets quickly, which is admirable, but if you rush things and overload the system, you could end up making everything more expensive through sheer volume and lack of proper planning. It's like going to the supermarket when you're hungry and just throwing everything into your trolley because you need food now. Technically, you've solved the immediate problem, but you've probably spent way more than necessary and bought a bunch of stuff you don't actually need. So where does this leave Ed Miliband and his promise of £300 savings? Well, in a rather awkward position, frankly. Bills are going up, not down. The political opposition is hammering him for it. And while he can point to long-term plans and future benefits, none of that helps people paying higher bills right now. There's also apparently some tension within government about this. The video title mentions, Keir Starmer is furious at Miliband for breaking his promise. Now, whether Starmer is genuinely furious or just mildly annoyed in that very British way where you tut quietly and avoid eye contact, we don't know. But if there is friction, it makes sense. Starmer is trying to position Labour as competent economic managers. Having your energy secretary make promises about cutting bills while bills actually rise is not exactly helpful for that narrative. The problem for Miliband is he's caught between competing priorities. He genuinely believes in the net zero transition. He thinks long-term investment in renewables and nuclear is the right path. And economically and environmentally, he's probably correct. But politically, promising £300 savings by 2030 while bills rise today is almost impossible to defend. It's technically not breaking the promise yet because 2030 hasn't arrived, but the trajectory isn't exactly inspiring confidence. And this is where political promises meet economic reality and usually end up in a rather messy collision. Politicians promise things that sound good during campaigns. Cut your bills, grow the economy, fix the NHS, build more houses. All excellent goals. But delivering them requires making difficult choices, spending money up front, and often accepting short-term pain for long-term gain. And voters, understandably, are not always thrilled about short-term pain, especially when it involves their energy bills during winter. The Conservatives are having an absolute field day with this, obviously. They're out of power, so they can promise whatever they like without actually having to deliver it. Their cheap power plan might be brilliant, or it might be complete nonsense, but they don't have to prove it works because they're not in government. It's the luxury of opposition. You can critique everything without having to show you're working. Meanwhile, Labor is stuck trying to balance keeping promises, managing the transition to net zero, keeping bills as low as possible, and avoiding a complete political disaster. It's like juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle. Technically,